the 22nd of November 1941. Sidi Rezegh, Eastern Libya. British tanks surged over the ridgeline in a sudden burst of movement, their engines hammering as Crusaders and Valentines swept toward the contested ground. The crews inside worked in tight coordination, calling ranges and switching targets with drilled precision. Ahead of them, German armored groups began forming for a counterattack, unaware of how quickly British armor had advanced into position. A Panzer III platoon rolled forward to meet what they assumed was a scattered British screen. Instead, they were met by a full Royal Armoured Corps thrust already closing the distance. British gunners fired first, rounds striking German hulls before the panzers could stabilize their own guns. The shock was immediate. Turrets turned, orders shouted, tracks clashed against the hard ground as British tanks pressed the attack with unexpected speed. What was meant to be a German counterstroke began collapsing within minutes as British armor cut through the forward elements and broke their formation apart with relentless momentum. The rapid strike left both sides reeling, but it was only the beginning of the clash that would define the day's battle. By late 1941, the North African desert had become the center of a relentless struggle between Britain and Germany. Control of Libya and Egypt determined supply routes, strategic depth, and the momentum of the entire campaign. For Britain, holding the region was essential to protect the Suez Canal and maintain pressure on Axis positions across the Mediterranean. Every regiment, every convoy, and every armored brigade sent into the desert represented both a military commitment and a political necessity. Operation Crusader, launched on the 18th of November 1941, was Britain's attempt to break the siege of Tobruk and regain the initiative. The plan required speed, pressure, and decisive armored action. British commanders understood that the wide desert plains favored mobile warfare, and they prepared their tank brigades accordingly. The Royal Armoured Corps fielded a mix of Valentines, Matilda IIS, Crusaders, and the first batches of American-built Grant tanks. Each model had strengths and weaknesses, but together they provided Britain with a capable force for rapid maneuver. German forces under General Erwin Rommel had relied heavily on swift counterattacks to disrupt Allied advances. Panzer units had earned a reputation for coordination and precision, often catching opponents before they could consolidate. British intelligence knew this pattern well. Commanders anticipated that any meaningful advance toward Tobruk would trigger a fast, concentrated German response. The challenge was to strike first, hit hard, and maintain momentum before the inevitable counterattack arrived. Sidi Rezegh, positioned on a plateau east of Tobruk, held tactical significance. Whoever controlled it could either protect the corridor to Tobruk or cut it entirely. The area contained landing grounds, supply tracks, and high ground suitable for artillery spotting. British planners knew Rommel would defend it aggressively. They also expected that any breach in German lines near Sidi Rezegh would lead to an immediate armored counterstroke. This understanding shaped their approach: reach the high ground quickly and meet the expected German response with overwhelming speed. On the ground, British armored brigades moved with determination. Crews were exhausted from long desert marches, but discipline held firm. The open terrain demanded constant vigilance. Tank commanders monitored compass bearings, wireless traffic, and dust trails on the horizon. Every movement risked ambush. Every halt risked being outflanked. Still, the brigades continued pushing westward, aiming to disrupt German supply routes and weaken their armored formations before the decisive phase of Operation Crusader unfolded. German reconnaissance underestimated the scale and speed of Britain's armored thrust. Reports indicated limited enemy armor and assumed British units were still consolidating far to the east. Rommel, preparing for his own planned movements, expected British forces to advance cautiously. Instead, the Royal Armoured Corps was already closing in on German assembly points, moving faster than predicted and striking deeper than anticipated. The developing situation created a mismatch between German expectations and battlefield reality. British commanders saw the opportunity clearly. Momentum was now on their side, and if they could maintain it, they could disrupt German preparations before the counterattack formed. Orders went out to push aggressively towards Sidi Rezegh. Tanks advanced in wide formations, keeping intervals tight enough for mutual support but flexible enough to adjust to unexpected threats. Infantry support elements followed in carriers and trucks, ready to secure ground behind the armored spearhead. As British armored units closed on WWII, the scale of their advance began forcing the Germans into rapid improvisation. Panzergruppe Fricke had been repositioning elements toward the south, expecting British pressure to build gradually along a predictable axis. Instead, British brigades were already pushing into areas the Germans believed secure. This unexpected speed disrupted their timetable, creating gaps between infantry, armor, and artillery that normally operated in close coordination. British headquarters monitored these developments through intercepted signals and forward observers. Reports indicated fragmented movement among German units, suggesting confusion rather than preparation. For the first time in weeks, the British recognized an advantage in mobility rather than merely reacting to Rommel's maneuvers. The challenge was to exploit this moment before German units reorganized into a cohesive counterattack group. Around WWII, the landscape favored armored action. The plateau offered long fields of fire and clear sightlines, allowing tank crews to acquire targets at significant distances. British commanders assigned positions carefully. Faster Crusader tanks would take forward roles, ready to engage German armor directly, while the heavier Valentines and Matilda IIS would support from steady firing positions. Grant tanks, with their powerful 75mm guns, acted as mobile fire bases capable of countering German anti-tank emplacements. Communication became the backbone of British coordination. Wireless operators relayed updates constantly, adjusting routes, spacing, and target priorities based on real-time reports. Desert warfare punished disorganization, and British units had learned through earlier setbacks the necessity of maintaining structure during long advances. Commanders reminded crews of likely German tactics: rapid armored thrusts aimed at striking flanks, probing attacks designed to break formations, and sudden close-range engagements where German gunnery typically excelled. Despite these risks, confidence began rising within British units. Logistics officers had managed to bring forward essential supplies, ensuring fuel and ammunition stocks were sufficient for sustained combat. Armored brigades knew they could fight hard and continue maneuvering without the constraints that had plagued earlier operations. This readiness strengthened morale, reinforcing the belief that their momentum could be decisive. German expectations remained centered on the belief that British armor lacked the cohesion and aggressiveness needed to deliver a coordinated strike. Reconnaissance flights had observed scattered columns and assumed they represented disorganized movements rather than deliberate positioning. This misinterpretation contributed to the German belief that a counterattack would likely succeed. Panzer units began assembling under this assumption, preparing to launch what they expected to be a sweeping strike against a sluggish British advance. British forward elements, however, observed signs of German staging. Dust columns rose in multiple directions, and tank silhouettes appeared briefly on distant ridgelines. Range estimations suggested German armor was concentrating for a push toward the plateau. Commanders immediately adjusted formations, preparing to meet the counterattack with speed rather than static defense. Within British tank crews, tension built steadily. Gunnery drills were repeated in brief moments of calm. Loaders checked ammunition racks. Drivers kept engines warm, ready for sudden acceleration. Commanders scanned through turret hatches, plotting lines of approach and fields of fire. Experience taught them that German counterattacks struck hard and fast. This time, however, British units were poised to move faster still. As the German elements tightened their formations to strike, British armor was already aligning for a rapid advance. The stage was set for a clash that would reveal just how deeply German assumptions underestimated the speed and coordination Britain had achieved. Speed defined Britain's advantage at WWII. In the desert, mobility was often more decisive than armor thickness or gun caliber, and British commanders understood this better than at any earlier point in the campaign. The Crusader tank, despite its mechanical challenges, delivered the velocity needed to close distances before German gunners could fully react. Its fast acceleration let British crews dictate the engagement range, a critical factor when facing Panzer IIIs and IVs that relied heavily on getting the first accurate shot. On this day, speed became a weapon in itself. British tanks moved in coordinated waves, combining rapid thrusts with sudden repositioning to confuse German rangefinders. By keeping formations flexible and constantly pushing forward, they denied the panzers a stable firing solution. German crews were accustomed to opponents who advanced cautiously. What they saw instead was a force that struck before they could finalize their attack formations. Speed also enhanced British decision-making. Wireless coordination allowed commanders to redirect thrusts within seconds, shifting units to exploit weak points in German lines. Every rapid adjustment compounded the pressure, turning what began as a counterattack into a defensive scramble for the Germans. The tempo of British movement created a psychological shock that disrupted the rhythm of the panzer crews. At WWII, speed didn't merely influence the battle, it overturned German expectations entirely, setting the tone for the clash to come. Inside each tank, the outcome depended on disciplined British crews who executed their roles with precision. The environment was cramped, loud, and unforgiving. Every second demanded coordination between commander, gunner, loader, driver, and wireless operator. Success relied on the seamless rhythm of their actions. Commanders assessed terrain and enemy silhouettes while issuing short, clear orders. Gunners kept their sights fixed, adjusting elevation and traverse against moving targets. Loaders worked without pause, ensuring the breech never stayed empty. Drivers managed throttle and clutch under sudden bursts of movement, keeping tanks aligned with their formations. Wireless operators relayed updates that shaped the entire brigade's maneuvers. During the German counterattack, British crews had no margin for hesitation. The speed of their own tanks meant every correction needed to be instant. A delayed adjustment, a moment of uncertainty, or a missed command could break the momentum. The crews knew the vulnerabilities of their machines: thin armor on Crusaders, limited gun angles on Valentines, yet they compensated through timing and coordination. Many had already fought in earlier desert clashes, learning the hard lessons of surprise attacks and fragmented movements. Now those lessons converged into practiced efficiency. As German armor moved to strike, British crews acted with confidence shaped by experience, training, and an understanding of how to exploit the strengths of their tanks. It was this synchronized human effort that transformed mechanical speed into battlefield dominance. Britain's tank mix brought a distinct balance of mobility and firepower to WWII. Each model contributed differently to the speed and shock that defined the engagement. The Crusader, with its fast suspension and high road speed, led the rapid thrusts. It lacked the heavier armor of its German counterparts, but its velocity allowed it to outmaneuver enemy gunners and seize firing opportunities. Crews used its agility to flank, reposition, and maintain initiative. The Valentine tank complemented this speed with resilience. Its thicker armor allowed it to withstand hits that would have disabled lighter vehicles. While slower, it served as a steady anchor in advancing formations, absorbing attention from German guns while faster tanks shifted to advantageous angles. This combination created a layered approach: durability at the center, mobility on the flanks. Then there was the Grant, whose 75mm gun offered a firepower advantage rare for British forces at the time. Mounted in the hull, it gave the brigade a long-range capability that could disrupt German positions before the main tank wave arrived. German crews were accustomed to engaging British tanks at ranges favoring the Panzer III. The Grant overturned that expectation, forcing German vehicles to maneuver under fire instead of dictating the engagement. Together, these tanks formed a structure that could strike quickly, withstand counterblows, and deliver accurate fire at multiple ranges. The mix of armor types turned Britain's advance from a single thrust into a multilayered force that caught the German counterattack off balance. British command decisions at WWII shaped the speed and precision of the tank response. Leadership understood that battles in the desert favored initiative. Waiting for perfect conditions meant giving the Germans time to form their counterattack. Acting first, striking before enemy formation stabilized, was essential. Brigade and regimental commanders emphasized rapid maneuver over rigid lines. Orders were short, clear, and built around momentum. Instead of holding defensive posture, British leaders pushed their tank units forward at the exact moment German armor was concentrating. This choice disrupted the timing of the German counterstroke and forced their commanders into reactive mode. Radio discipline played a decisive role. British officers coordinated movements through constant communication, adjusting advance angles and redirecting thrusts based on fresh reports. Unlike earlier operations where units became isolated, the command network at WWII held firm. Leaders ensured no brigade moved blindly and no regiment charged unsupported. This cohesive structure meant British commanders could identify weak points in German positioning and strike before the panzers fully deployed. Leadership did not rely on overwhelming firepower. Instead, it relied on timing, tempo, and the trust placed in tank crews to execute orders immediately. Command shaped the rhythm of battle. It turned British armor from scattered vehicles into a unified force that met the German counterattack at exactly the point where speed could be most decisive. German forces entered the battle with confidence built from earlier victories. Panzer crews believed they understood British habits: cautious movement, fragmented advances, and slow exploitation of openings. These expectations shaped their approach to the counterattack at WWII. German commanders assumed they could gather their armor, strike sharply at the British flank, and break the advance before it gained coherence. But they misjudged both time and distance. Reconnaissance underestimated how fast the British brigades were closing. Through this miscalculation, German armor moved into staging areas expecting limited resistance, only to encounter British tanks already aligned for attack. This moment of surprise delayed German coordination, interrupting the chain of actions required for a clean counterstroke. Panzer crews found themselves reacting instead of initiating. Their doctrine depended on seizing the first firing opportunity, gaining range superiority, and forcing opponents to fight defensively. Yet British tanks pressed forward so quickly that German gunners struggled to maintain stable sights. Range calculations changed by the second. Turrets had to traverse constantly. Positions meant for offensive movement became defensive footholds. German infantry, expecting to support a decisive armored push, instead faced British tanks breaking through their forward elements. Anti-tank guns were rushed into place but often met fire from British grants before they fully deployed. Misjudgment had created a battlefield where German reactions lagged behind British momentum, leaving their counterattack fragmented from the start. The rapid British advance reshaped the battlefield before the main clash had even begun. The initial shock threw German units off balance, disrupting their coordination and silencing key guns that were essential for sustaining a counterattack. Each British thrust compressed the German formation, forcing them into defensive patterns they had not prepared for. This disruption spread quickly across the line. Infantry elements meant to accompany the armored strike found themselves isolated as British tanks bypassed their routes. Artillery observers struggled to update firing solutions because British armor kept shifting positions before grid references became valid. The tempo shattered the normal rhythm of German operations. For British forces, the effect was transformative. Momentum generated confidence. The success of early strikes reinforced cohesion across units. Communications flowed smoothly, and every accurate shot strengthened the sense that the counterattack could be broken entirely. British commanders recognized that they were not merely halting a German strike but reversing it, turning the initiative decisively in their favor. By the time the main German armored elements attempted to reorganize, British tanks had already seized key firing angles and disrupted staging areas. The impact of speed was no longer tactical, it was operational. The counterattack was collapsing faster than German command could stabilize it. This shift set the stage for the decisive clash that followed, where British tanks would meet the core of the German assault at the moment of its greatest vulnerability. The first sign of trouble reached the British lines just after midday. A forward scout car from the Guards Armored Division reported unusual engine noise rising from beyond the blockage. The sound was heavy, rhythmic, unmistakable. German armor was on the move. The direction was southeast of Lebenibokich, near the junction leading toward St. Charles de Percy. It meant only one thing: a counterattack was forming. British commanders reacted immediately. Churchill and Cromwell crews were ordered to stand ready, engines running, turrets locked toward the tree lines. Infantry platoons tightened their positions along the narrow sunken lanes, preparing for the force they knew was coming. Every man in that sector understood the stakes. If the German attack broke through, it would cut directly into the British advance and stall the entire push of Operation Bluecoat. Moments later, the German armor appeared, not cautiously, but with speed. Panzer IVs pushed through the hedgerows first, their silhouettes emerging like dark shapes from a wall of green. Half-tracks followed, carrying grenadiers who leapt out and fanned across the fields. The attack was larger than expected. British intelligence had predicted movement from the 21st Panzer Division, but no one anticipated they would commit so many tanks at once. The first clash happened so fast the gunners barely had time to adjust their sights. A Churchill from the 6th Guards Tank Brigade fired the opening shot, striking a Panzer IV just as it tried to turn into a firing position. The explosion echoed down the valley. Within seconds the entire front erupted in thunder. British rounds cut through the hedgerow gaps while German shells blasted the earthen banks in front of the Churchills. Infantry on both sides dropped low, seeking any hollow, ditch, or root cluster they could find. But the British tanks held the line. The Churchill's thick armor absorbed hits the German crews expected to punch through. Even when the front plates dented and shuddered, the tanks stayed in place, guns firing steadily, methodically. Smoke drifted across the fields as both sides struggled for visibility, but the British discipline remained tight. Tank commanders used short bursts of movement, shifting between hedgerows, never staying exposed long enough for the Germans to gain an advantage. The Germans pushed harder. Their infantry attempted to flank the British armor, slipping along the narrow farm tracks hoping to find a weak point. But the Guards' infantry blocked them at every turn. Bren gunners set up behind stone walls, cutting down groups that tried to advance. Mortar teams brought down steady fire to break up concentrations forming behind the German tanks. The enemy's momentum began slowing. A turning moment came when a British Firefly, positioned slightly higher on a ridge, spotted a Panzer IV attempting to lead a breakthrough. The gunner waited for the turret to complete its turn, then fired. The shot punched straight through the German tank and set it ablaze. The explosion caused confusion among the other vehicles. For the first time, the German line hesitated. British commanders seized the moment. Orders went down the line, advance by bounds. The Churchills pushed forward with deliberate force, each movement measured, each halt precise. Their presence alone unsettled the German infantry. Cromwell's shifted to the flanks, engines roaring, preparing for a wider push that would determine the fate of the entire battle. The Germans realized too late what was happening. Their counterattack, meant to shatter the British spearhead, now faced a wall of armor refusing to give ground. And behind that wall, fresh British tanks were arriving. The balance of strength had begun to tilt. By mid-afternoon the battlefield was no longer equal. The British tanks were not just holding the line, they were beginning to shape the next phase of the fight. What had started as a desperate German thrust was turning into a battle of endurance, and the British armor was proving they could endure more. That shift, that subtle moment when German attack turned to German struggle, set the stage for the decisive blow to come. The German thrust reached its breaking point the moment the first Cromwell troop crested the slight rise overlooking St. Charles de Percy. The British gunners saw the entire German line beneath them, exposed vehicles, scattered infantry, and a command half-track trying to reverse out of the chaos. The squadron leader did not wait for a perfect firing angle. He simply gave the order every gunner hoped to hear. Engage! The British tanks opened fire in a blistering cascade. Armor-piercing rounds tore across the French fields, and the German counterattack, already shaken from its first collision with the Churchills, now faced a second hammer coming down directly onto its flank. German reports later described the moment as a violent and immediate collapse of cohesion. British accounts phrased it more plainly: they broke. The Cromwells moved with exceptional pace, firing on the move, rarely pausing for more than a second. Their speed turned the German withdrawal into a rout. A Panzer IV attempted to rotate its turret toward the charging British line, but a single shot from a Firefly cut through the gun mantlet and ended the duel instantly. The surviving German armor began pulling back through the hedgerows, but the withdrawal was too slow, and the British advance was too fast. Infantry from the 15th Scottish Division continued pushing forward behind the armor, clearing pockets of resistance trapped in the sudden collapse. They expected scattered fighting. Instead, they found abandoned positions, wrecked vehicles, and German troops retreating without coordination. The momentum had shifted entirely. By late afternoon, the British tanks reached the next ridge, from which the full extent of their victory became visible. Smoke rose from more than a dozen German vehicles. Tracks and equipment littered the lanes. A captured German radioman, stunned and exhausted, told his interrogators the same sentence repeated by others that day. "We did not expect you to move so fast." The British armor did not lift pressure. Cromwell's continued sweeping the flanks, denying the Germans any opportunity to regroup. Churchill's squadrons formed a solid wall to absorb any last-minute thrusts. Firefly crews maintained overwatch positions, ready for any panzer trying to slip back into the fight. Every element of British armored doctrine, speed, weight, fire discipline, and coordination, worked seamlessly. As evening light faded, the German counterattack no longer existed in any meaningful form. The 21st Panzer Division had lost too many vehicles to continue the offensive. Its surviving units were scattered, its command structure overwhelmed, and its forward elements trapped in broken hedgerows that now served only as choke points for British advances. The British tank crews, many fighting since the Normandy landings, understood the significance of the moment. The battlefield fell quiet except for the distant rumble of engines repositioning. Recovery units moved forward to tow damaged British vehicles, though losses were lighter than expected given the scale of the engagement. What had begun as a sudden German thrust had ended in a decisive British victory carved out in just hours. Forward patrols signaled that the road toward Hill 309 was now open. The way south, toward WWII, toward the eventual breakout, and toward the tightening collapse of German lines, had been cleared not by chance, but by the speed and coordination of British armor acting at the exact moment needed. And with the German counterattack destroyed, the wider shape of the operation began to change. The destruction of the German counterattack left an immediate imprint on the battlefield. British tanks held the crest lines around St. Charles de Percy, their gunners scanning for any lingering enemy armor. The road through the Bocage, previously threatened by the Panzer push, remained secure. Forward infantry squads moved through hedgerows to confirm positions and clear abandoned or wrecked vehicles. British commanders assessed the tactical picture with cautious optimism. The counterattack, expected to stall the British advance, had collapsed within hours. Casualty reports from armored brigades were surprisingly low, given the scale of engagement. Only a handful of Churchills and Cromwells required minor repairs, and fuel shortages were minimal thanks to efficient logistics. Infantry losses mirrored this, limited primarily to shrapnel wounds and minor burns. German forces faced far greater disruption. Vehicles destroyed or immobilized littered the fields, and anti-tank teams had been forced to withdraw under fire. Commanders struggled to restore cohesion. Isolated Panzer IVs and half-tracks attempted to regroup in small, vulnerable pockets. Morale among German troops was fragile. Multiple reports intercepted by British intelligence described confusion, disbelief, and the sudden realization that their offensive had failed. For the British, the psychological impact was substantial. Tank crews and infantry alike understood that their training, speed, and coordination had delivered a decisive advantage. Letters and diaries from the day reflect a mixture of relief and pride, the certainty that, when well led and executed with precision, British armor could outmatch its German counterpart. This sense of confidence would carry forward into subsequent phases of Operation Bluecoat. The aftermath also highlighted doctrinal lessons. Coordinated use of Churchills for durability, Cromwells for mobility, and Fireflies for long-range engagement had created a lead defense capable of absorbing and reversing enemy attacks. Commanders emphasized the importance of communication, rapid decision-making, and initiative. Field reports would later stress that the collapse of the German counterattack was as much a product of tactical insight as it was of raw firepower. Resupply teams worked quickly to ensure ammunition and fuel were distributed to forward units. Medical personnel attended to the lightly wounded, while engineers began clearing debris and immobilized tanks from critical lanes. British artillery units repositioned to support anticipated follow-up attacks, ensuring that any lingering German movements could be contained. By the end of the day, the battlefield bore the marks of rapid British dominance, wrecked German armor, intact British formations, and a clear path toward the next operational objectives. The immediate tactical success reinforced the broader strategic goal of Operation Bluecoat, to secure key terrain, maintain offensive momentum, and weaken German defensive capability in the Normandy sector. The swift and disciplined response demonstrated how preparation, speed, and leadership could turn what might have been a precarious situation into a clear British victory. Momentum, once seized, became a force multiplier, shaping the battlefield and setting conditions for the decisive follow-up. The consequences of the destroyed German counterattack extended beyond the immediate battlefield. By neutralizing the 21st Panzer Division's thrust, British forces preserved the integrity of their advance through Normandy. Key ridgelines and approach roads, critical for Operation Bluecoat's success, remained in Allied hands. The collapse of German resistance opened avenues for follow-up operations, enabling further exploitation of the momentum gained by the armored brigades. German units that survived the initial engagement were forced to withdraw in disarray. Tracks, half-tracks, and infantry columns moved under constant threat from British patrols and artillery. Commanders struggled to maintain cohesion. Communications lines had been severed, radios jammed or destroyed, and officers became isolated from their formations. This disorganization delayed any attempt to regroup, giving the British a clear temporal advantage to consolidate gains and push forward. British armored crews used this opportunity to reinforce positions. Infantry secured hedgerows, bridges, and crossroads, while engineers cleared obstacles that could impede rapid tank movement. Ammunition resupply and vehicle maintenance were completed efficiently, ensuring the British force retained operational readiness. This level of preparedness allowed British units to maintain offensive pressure while denying the Germans the opportunity to mount a second attempt. The psychological impact on both sides was stark. British crews and infantry felt reinforced in their confidence, witnessing the tangible results of their discipline, training, and coordination. Letters and diary entries from the day reflect pride in the rapid neutralization of the German attack. In contrast, German troops reported disbelief at the speed and efficiency of the British response. Even seasoned panzer crews were unprepared for the combination of mobility, firepower, and coordinated tactics they encountered. Strategically, the failure of the counterattack influenced subsequent German planning. The rapid loss of armored strength forced German commanders to adopt more cautious tactics in subsequent engagements, redistributing units to defend against further British thrusts. British reports later noted that the incident became a case study in operational mobility, emphasizing speed, lead defense, and precise coordination. By evening, British forces had not only secured the contested terrain but had established forward positions to facilitate the next phase of the operation. Casualty and equipment reports confirmed a minimal loss of British resources compared to the significant attrition suffered by German units. The balance of strength in the sector had shifted decisively, setting conditions for continued operational success. The events of the day demonstrated that the combination of speed, firepower, leadership, and preparation could overcome larger, experienced armored forces. British doctrine, tested under fire, had proven itself, while German miscalculations reinforced the consequences of underestimating both training and operational tempo. The battlefield, littered with disabled German vehicles and abandoned equipment, stood as a testament to the effectiveness of coordinated British armored action. As night fell, British commanders reviewed their gains and assessed next steps. The destruction of the German counterattack had secured not only territory but also morale, operational flexibility, and the ability to dictate the tempo of subsequent engagements. The lessons of the day, the value of speed, precision, and initiative, would influence the conduct of armored warfare throughout Normandy. The rapid defeat of the German counterattack at WWII and later at St. Charles de Percy illustrates the decisive impact of preparation, speed, and coordination in modern armored warfare. British tanks, led by experienced crews and guided by disciplined command, transformed what might have been a defensive stalemate into a display of operational dominance. Every movement, every shot, and every decision combined to create an advantage far beyond the numerical strength of the forces involved. At the heart of this success was human skill. Tank crews operated under pressure, navigating difficult terrain while maintaining continuous fire and communication. Their discipline allowed them to exploit gaps, anticipate enemy reactions, and strike with precision. The combination of training and instinct turned mechanical machinery into an extension of human judgment, demonstrating how the effectiveness of technology depends upon those who wield it. Leadership, both at the tactical and operational levels, proved equally critical. British commanders empowered their crews to make split-second decisions while maintaining an overarching strategy. Orders were clear and flexible, allowing initiative to flourish. This trust in personnel, combined with foresight and planning, ensured that the British armored advance was faster, more coordinated, and ultimately more effective than the German counterattack it faced. The psychological dimension was profound. British forces gained confidence in their equipment and training, while German units, previously accustomed to battlefield dominance, were forced to recognize the consequences of misjudging speed and coordination. The collapse of their counterattack demonstrated that momentum and initiative could outweigh raw firepower, emphasizing the importance of adaptability in combat. Historically, these engagements reinforced British armored doctrine and shaped subsequent operations in Normandy and beyond. The lessons of coordination, speed, and decisive action became central to future armored campaigns. More broadly, the events serve as a reminder that warfare is not merely a contest of machines or numbers, but a complex interplay of human skill, leadership, and the capacity to act decisively at the right moment. Ultimately, the story of British tanks overwhelming their German opponents at incredible speed highlights a timeless principle: preparation, cohesion, and courage can turn even the most daunting challenges into a defining victory. In that brief, intense confrontation, British resolve, ingenuity, and training prevailed, leaving an enduring mark on the history of the Second World War.